She came seeking work at midnight. The Duke in mourning opened the door, cradling his sleeping child. The gaslight trembled against the stone facade of Greystone Hall as midnight approached. Fog crept between ancient yew trees that had witnessed generations of Harrow dukes. On this night, however, the ancestral estate bore witness to something rarer than nobility, a moment when desperation met compassion at the threshold between two broken lives. Eleanor Vale stood before the imposing oak door, her trembling fingers clutching a rain-soaked letter of recommendation. Her woolen cloak, once fine but now threadbare, offered little protection against the biting autumn chill. The journey had taken its toll. Her boots were ruined, her hair escaped its pins, and hunger had carved hollows beneath her cheekbones. Yet dignity remained in the set of her shoulders as she lifted the brass knocker. "This shall be my final attempt," she whispered to herself. "Should this door remain closed, I shall have nowhere else to turn." The sound of the knocker echoed through the cavernous entrance hall like a death knell. Eleanor pressed her palm against the cold stone wall to steady herself as the wind moaned through the empty gardens. The world seemed to hold its breath. Inside, Edmund Harrow, the 7th Duke of Ashbourne, paced the library floor with his infant son cradled against his shoulder. The child had finally surrendered to sleep after hours of inconsolable crying. Though servants waited in the shadows, it was Edmund alone who carried this burden each night, as if the weight of his son might somehow balance the unbearable absence of his wife. "Hush, Henry," he murmured, his aristocratic features etched with exhaustion. "The night shall pass, as all things must." The unexpected knocking startled both father and child. Henry stirred but did not wake. Edmund frowned, for visitors at this hour were unprecedented. His household staff had been instructed never to disturb his solitude after nightfall, a decree that had remained unbroken since the Duchess's passing 3 months prior. "Your Grace," came the hesitant voice of Simmons, the elderly butler, "there appears to be someone at the door." "At this hour?" Edmund's voice held the quiet authority of generations of command. "Send them away. The household receives no callers." "Indeed, Your Grace. However," Simmons hesitated, "it appears to be a young woman, sir, most distressed by the look of her." Something in the butler's tone, perhaps a note of genuine concern from a man not given to sentiment, gave the Duke pause. He looked down at his sleeping son, then toward the windows where rain now lashed against the glass. "I shall attend to it myself," he declared unexpectedly. Surprise flickered across Simmons's features. "As you wish, Your Grace." Edmund moved through the silent corridors, the sleeping child still nestled against his chest. Servants stepped back into shadows as he passed, averting their eyes from the unusual sight of their master in such a domestic posture. The grand entrance hall loomed before him, cold marble and mahogany bearing silent witness to his approach. With one hand supporting his son, Edmund himself drew back the heavy iron bolt. The ancient hinges protested as the massive door swung open, revealing the slight figure waiting on the threshold. Wind and rain swept in, catching Eleanor's cloak and the Duke's dressing gown. For one eternal moment, they regarded one another. He, tall and imposing even in grief, cradling innocence against darkness. She, proud despite desperation, her eyes widening at the unexpected sight of nobility, answering his own door with a child in arms. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace," Eleanor spoke, her voice barely audible above the storm. "I have come seeking employment. I was informed your household had need of a nursemaid." The lamp in Edmund's free hand cast amber light across her face, revealing features that were striking not for conventional beauty, but for something far more rare, quiet dignity in the face of evident suffering. Her gaze, though lowered in deference, held no obsequiousness. "At midnight?" he inquired, his tone neither kind nor cruel, merely curious. "I have walked since morning, sir. The village is far, and the last coach departed before I could reach it." A simple explanation, offered without self-pity. Henry stirred in his sleep, small fingers clutching at his father's black cravat. The movement drew Eleanor's gaze, and something softened in her expression, not sentimentality, but recognition of vulnerability that transcended station. "Do you have references?" Edmund asked, though he knew the sodden paper in her hand could scarcely be legible now. "I served the Countess of Westmoreland until her passing," Eleanor replied. "Her steward provided testament to my character, and yet you come to my door at this hour in this manner. Necessity, Your Grace, knows neither convenience nor propriety." The words, though bold, were spoken with such quiet dignity that they carried no impertinence. Edmund studied her for a long moment. In the hollow silence of recent months, he had come to recognize fellow travelers on the road of loss. This woman, standing proud despite her circumstances, was no stranger to sorrow. "Enter," he said at last, stepping aside. "The night grows cold, and judgment shall wait until morning." As Eleanor crossed the threshold, the butler materialized from the shadows, his expression carefully neutral. "Simmons, see that hot water and suitable quarters are prepared," Edmund instructed. "We shall discuss terms tomorrow." "Very good, Your Grace." The butler bowed, his eyes betraying momentary surprise before he retreated to execute the order. Eleanor stood in the vastness of the entrance hall, lamplight dancing across ancient portraits of Harrow ancestors who gazed down with painted indifference. "Thank you, Your Grace," she said simply. "Your mercy shall not be forgotten." Edmund did not smile. He had forgotten how, but nodded once. "It is not mercy, Miss Vale, sir. Eleanor Vale. Miss Vale, it is not mercy to offer shelter from a storm. It is merely human." As if to punctuate his words, the infant in his arms sighed in sleep, his small face turning toward the warmth of his father's chest. "You have experience with children?" Edmund asked, his tone softening imperceptibly as he gazed down at his son. "Yes, Your Grace. I raised my younger siblings after our parents were taken by fever." The Duke nodded, a decision forming. "Then perhaps Providence, rather than misfortune, has guided your steps to Greystone Hall tonight. For the first time that evening, perhaps the first time in months, something that might have been hope flickered in Eleanor's eyes. Perhaps, Your Grace. I pray it may be so." As the grandfather clock tolled the final stroke of midnight, a silent understanding passed between them, two souls who had lost much, standing at the precipice of something neither could yet name. "Tomorrow, then," Edmund said, his words both dismissal and promise. "Tomorrow," Eleanor echoed, as Simmons reappeared to guide her to quarters. The Duke watched them depart, his son still sleeping peacefully against his chest. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but within Greystone Hall something had shifted, like a breath drawn after too long underwater. The house, which had known only the echoes of grief for months, now held the quiet footfalls of possibility. The night no longer seemed quite so endless. Dawn arrived at Greystone Hall with hesitant fingers of pale gold that reached through leaded glass windows. Eleanor woke in unfamiliar surroundings, momentarily disoriented by the crisp linen sheets and the absence of damp cold that had been her constant companion. The events of the previous night seemed almost dreamlike, until a brisk knock at the door reminded her of their reality. "Enter," she called, hastily straightening her borrowed nightdress. The door opened to reveal a stern-faced woman of imposing stature, grey-streaked auburn hair pulled into a severe bun beneath a pristine cap. Her black dress and set of keys marked her as the housekeeper. "I am Mrs. Winters," the woman announced without preamble. "His Grace wishes to speak with you in the library at 8:30. You will find suitable attire in the wardrobe. I expect you presentable and punctual." Eleanor rose, meeting the housekeeper's assessing gaze directly. "Thank you, Mrs. Winters. I shall not keep His Grace waiting." Something like approval flickered across the older woman's features, quickly masked. "See that you do not. The household runs on precision, not sentiment." When the door closed, Eleanor moved to the wardrobe, finding a simple black dress that, while clearly meant for a lady's maid rather than a nursemaid, would serve admirably. The clock on the mantel showed 7:15, time enough to prepare herself for whatever judgment awaited. The library at Greystone Hall stood as testament to generations of scholarly Harrows. Floor-to-ceiling shelves housed leather-bound volumes, their spines gleaming dully in the morning light. Edmund sat behind a massive oak desk, reviewing correspondence with the methodical precision that had become his refuge. The child, Henry, lay in a Moses basket nearby, watched over by an elderly nursemaid whose rheumatism made lifting him increasingly difficult. "Your Grace," Simmons announced from the doorway. "Miss Vale." Edmund looked up to see Eleanor standing at the threshold, her borrowed attire lending her an air of belonging she had lacked the previous night. Her hair, now neatly pinned, revealed the graceful line of her neck. Only her hands, clasped before her, betrayed any anxiety. "Miss Vale, approach," he commanded, his tone measured but not unkind. Eleanor crossed the Persian carpet with precise steps, stopping at a respectful distance. "Good morning, Your Grace. I trust I find you well." "As well as circumstance permits," Edmund replied, setting aside his papers. "Before we proceed further, I must inquire about the nature of your departure from Westmoreland House." A shadow crossed Eleanor's face, quickly controlled. "The Countess passed into God's care 6 months ago, Your Grace. Her nephew, who inherited, had no need for additional staff. "And you have sought employment since?" "I have, sir, though positions for which I am qualified are scarce. Most households prefer younger maids for general work, and nursemaids with fewer connections." Edmund raised an eyebrow. "Connections, Miss Vale?" Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "My father was a clergyman before illness and misfortune befell him, Your Grace. I was educated accordingly. Some find this unsuitable in a servant." Before Edmund could respond, Henry awoke with a demanding cry. The elderly nursemaid moved to attend him, her joints protesting visibly. "Allow me, Mrs. Hodges," Eleanor said quietly, looking to the Duke for permission. Edmund nodded once, curious. Eleanor approached the basket with unhurried grace, speaking softly to the child as she lifted him. "Good morning, young master. What a fine voice you have to greet the day." Her hands moved with practiced ease, cradling Henry's head and supporting his small body. The infant's cries subsided almost immediately as she held him against her shoulder, one hand patting his back in gentle rhythm. "You handle him well," Edmund observed, something indefinable shifting in his expression. "Children respond to confidence, Your Grace. They know when they are held by uncertain hands." Henry hiccuped once, then settled against Eleanor's shoulder with a contented sigh. The transformation from wailing infant to peaceful child was remarkable enough that even Mrs. Hodges looked impressed. "His late mother would approve of your technique," the old nursemaid offered, perhaps the highest praise possible in this household of grief. Edmund's face remained impassive, but his eyes lingered on the tableau before him. His son, content in the arms of this stranger who had arrived like something from a Gothic novel, rain-soaked and desperate at his door. "The position of nursemaid requires absolute dedication," he said abruptly. "Henry is all that remains of his mother. His care is paramount." Eleanor nodded, still gently patting the baby's back. "I understand, Your Grace. Some treasures cannot be measured by earthly value. You would live in the nursery adjoining chambers. Your responsibilities would be solely to Henry, his feeding, his education as he grows, his well-being in all matters. And you, sir? What role do you wish to maintain in your son's daily life?" The question was bold, but Eleanor's tone held no presumption, only practical inquiry. Edmund seemed taken aback. Since Catherine's death in childbirth, he had held his son each night, walking the darkened corridors until the child slept. Yet during daylight hours, he had maintained distance, as if unable to reconcile joy and grief in the same moment. "I am his father," he replied, his voice unexpectedly rough. "I shall be present." Something like approval warmed Eleanor's eyes. "As it should be, Your Grace." From the doorway came an unexpected voice, cultured and cold as winter frost. "My dear cousin, have you taken to interviewing servants personally now? How democratic." Lord Nathaniel Crowe stood framed in the library entrance, his elegant figure resplendent in a tailored riding coat. His fair hair and fine features marked him as handsome by society's measure, yet something in his smile failed to reach his eyes. "Nathaniel," Edmund acknowledged, rising, "we did not expect you until next week. The season in London grows tedious. I thought country air might prove refreshing." Crowe's gaze settled on Eleanor, assessing her with the practiced eye of a man accustomed to cataloguing women's worth. "I see you've acquired new staff." "Miss Vale has joined us as Henry's nursemaid," Edmund replied, his tone cooling noticeably. Crowe approached, circling Eleanor as she stood holding the child. "Curious, she appears rather refined for such a position, almost as if she belongs in the drawing room rather than the nursery." Eleanor's posture remained perfect, her expression composed, despite the obvious impropriety of his scrutiny. "Education need not preclude service, Lord Crowe. Indeed, it may enhance it." Crowe laughed, a sound without warmth. "She speaks, and with such pretty phrases. Cousin, you must take care. Such eloquence in servants often precedes ambition." Edmund's jaw tightened perceptibly. "Miss Vale arrived last night seeking honest employment. I find her qualified for the position." "At night? How unconventional." Crowe's implication hung in the air like poison. Henry, perhaps sensing the tension, began to fuss. Eleanor soothed him with instinctive skill, her focus on the child rather than the insinuation. "I believe Master Henry requires his morning feeding," she said calmly. "With your permission, Your Grace." Edmund nodded, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Hodges will show you the nursery arrangements." As Eleanor followed the elderly nursemaid from the room, she felt Lord Crowe's gaze following her, calculating, cold, and somehow hungry. She tightened her arms protectively around Henry, sensing instinctively that in this house of shadows, the greatest darkness might not be grief, but ambition. "Quite the discovery, cousin," Crowe remarked once the women had departed. "A nursemaid, with the bearing of a lady, arriving mysteriously in the night. One might almost suspect a Gothic romance unfolding." "Your imagination exceeds your discretion, Nathaniel," Edmund replied coldly. Miss Vale's references are sound, and Henry responds well to her care. "References?" Crowe's eyebrow arched. "From whom, pray tell?" "The Countess of Westmoreland." "Ah, old Lady Margaret. Dead these 6 months past, is she not?" "Most convenient for verification purposes." Edmund's patience visibly thinned. "What precisely are you implying?" Crowe adjusted his cuffs with elegant nonchalance. "Nothing unseemly, cousin. Merely that grief can make even the most discerning judgment susceptible. A beautiful woman arrives at midnight, and by morning is cradling the Harrow heir. The situation invites observation." "Your concern is noted," Edmund said, his tone dismissive. "Now, if you'll excuse me, estate matters require my attention." As the Duke gathered his papers, Crowe smiled, the private smile of a man setting pieces on a chessboard. "Of course, we shall have ample time to discuss all manner of things during my stay. Family matters, inheritance considerations, the proper running of Greystone Hall." The implication hung in the air between them as Edmund departed, that in this house of mourning, more than one kind of vulture circled. In the nursery above, Eleanor settled into a rocking chair with Henry, singing softly as she fed him. The infant's trust was immediate and complete, his tiny hand curling around her finger as if he had found something precious he had no intention of relinquishing. "There now, young master," she murmured. "The world may be filled with storms, but in this moment you are safe." From the doorway, Mrs. Winters observed silently, her expression inscrutable. Whether she saw threat or salvation in this new arrangement remained her own counsel, but her gaze followed Eleanor's gentle ministrations with growing interest. "The house has known too little tenderness of late," the housekeeper remarked unexpectedly. "See that it does not become excess." Eleanor looked up, reading the complex warning in the older woman's eyes. "Balance in all things, Mrs. Winters, especially love." The housekeeper nodded once, satisfied, and departed to oversee her domain. Beyond the nursery windows, autumn sunlight filtered through thinning leaves, casting patterns of light and shadow across the ancient estate. In this precarious new beginning, nothing was certain except the child's steady breathing and the watchful eyes, some kind, some calculating, that would bear witness to whatever unfolded within these walls of stone and secrets. Days at Greystone Hall settled into rhythm, with Eleanor establishing herself as the centre of Henry's world. Her gentle efficiency impressed the staff, and even Mrs. Winters unbent enough to remark that the nursery had never been better managed. The child flourished, his night terrors subsiding, his small face increasingly animated with curiosity and contentment. Edmund found himself lingering in the nursery with increasing frequency, ostensibly to observe his son's progress, yet his gaze often drifted to Eleanor as she moved about her duties. There was something in her calm presence that seemed to quiet the ceaseless storm of his grief, not banishing it, for such wounds never truly heal, but making it bearable, as if she had found a way to let light coexist with shadow. "You've transformed him," Edmund remarked one evening, watching Henry play contentedly on a blanket before the fire. "I scarcely recognize my son." Eleanor smiled, a rare expression that transformed her serious features. "Children are remarkably resilient, Your Grace. They respond to consistency and affection." "As do we all, I suppose," he replied, surprising himself with the personal admission. "Indeed, though adults often resist what might heal them." Eleanor spoke softly, her hands busy with mending. "Grief becomes familiar, a constant companion when all else proves fleeting." Edmund studied her profile, highlighted by firelight. "You speak from experience, Miss Vale." She nodded, her needle pausing. "My mother, then my father, and finally the Countess who showed me such kindness. Each departure carved spaces within me that cannot be filled, merely accommodated. Yet you do not seem bitter." "What purpose would bitterness serve, Your Grace? It would not return them to me, nor honour their memory." Eleanor set aside her sewing to lift Henry, who had begun to fuss. "They would wish me to continue living, not merely existing." The simple wisdom of her words struck Edmund with unexpected force. Since Catherine's death he had indeed existed rather than lived, moving through days like a ghost in his own home. Watching Eleanor with Henry, her face alight with genuine joy in his small accomplishments, he felt something stir within him that he had believed permanently extinguished. Lord Crowe observed these developments with calculating precision. His initial week's visit extended into a month, his reasons for remaining at Greystone Hall becoming increasingly transparent to all but Edmund, whose judgment remained clouded by grief and emerging hope. "Cousin," Crowe remarked casually over brandy one evening, "have you considered that young Henry will require a mother's influence as he grows? A nursemaid, however competent, cannot provide the guidance of a proper lady." Edmund frowned into his glass. "Catherine has been gone scarcely 4 months, Nathaniel. Such considerations are premature." Of course," Crowe agreed smoothly. "I merely speak out of concern for the Harrow legacy. Our bloodline has always valued proper alliances. Henry's future is secure." "Is it?" Crowe's voice lowered confidentially. "I've observed your interest in Miss Vale's company. The staff has noticed as well." Edmund's head snapped up. "What precisely are you implying?" "Nothing untoward, cousin. Merely that in your vulnerable state certain attachments might form without proper consideration of consequences. Miss Vale, while undoubtedly accomplished for her station, remains a servant. She has shown nothing but propriety and dedication to my son." "For now," Crowe agreed. "Yet history teaches us that beauty combined with intelligence often harbors ambition. One must wonder what aspiration brought her to your door that night." Before Edmund could respond, the library door opened to admit Eleanor herself, Henry cradled in her arms. She stopped abruptly upon seeing the gentleman in conversation. "Forgive the interruption, Your Grace. Master Henry woke from his nap requesting your company. I did not realize you were engaged." The infant's face lit with recognition at the sight of his father, small arms reaching toward him. Edmund rose immediately, taking his son without hesitation, a natural gesture that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. "No interruption, Miss Vale. Lord Crowe and I had concluded our discussion." Crowe's smile did not reach his eyes as he observed the tableau before him, father, child, and the woman who had somehow bridged the chasm between them. Indeed, family matters should always take precedence over idle speculation. Eleanor's gaze met his briefly, recognizing the veiled threat in his words. She curtsied with perfect form, her dignity a palpable rebuke to his insinuations. "If that will be all, Your Grace, I shall prepare Master Henry's evening meal." "Actually, I believe I shall join you in the nursery," Edmund decided, his tone brooking no argument. "The evening is pleasant, and Henry might enjoy watching the sunset from the western windows." As they departed, leaving Crowe alone with his brandy and thwarted manipulations, a new tension settled over Greystone Hall, the silent confrontation between emerging hope and calculated malice. That night, as autumn winds rattled the ancient windows, Eleanor sat by Henry's cradle long after the child had fallen asleep. The position she had accepted out of desperate necessity had become something far more profound. In this house of sorrow, she had found purpose beyond mere survival. The child slumbering peacefully before her had claimed a portion of her heart that she had believed permanently sealed, and his father. Eleanor closed her eyes, forcing her thoughts away from dangerous territory. A nursemaid did not permit herself tender feelings toward her employer, regardless of his kindness, or the moments of genuine connection that had passed between them. Such feelings could lead only to dismissal, or worse, scandal. From the adjoining sitting room came a soft knock. Rising quietly to avoid waking Henry, Eleanor crossed to the door, expecting perhaps Mrs. Winters with instructions for the following day. Instead, she found Edmund standing in the corridor, still dressed, though the clock had struck midnight. His expression was troubled, his normally composed features betraying inner conflict. "Your Grace?" she said, surprised. "Is something amiss?" "I find myself unable to rest," he admitted. "My thoughts are turbulent." Eleanor hesitated, propriety warring with compassion. "Would you care to look in on Master Henry? He sleeps most peacefully tonight." Edmund nodded, following her into the nursery, where his son lay surrounded by soft lamplight and shadows. For several minutes he simply watched the child breathe, finding in that rhythm some measure of peace. "Lord Crowe believes I am failing in my duties to the Harrow name," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor remained silent, sensing he required a listener rather than counsel. "He suggests that my grief has clouded my judgment, particularly regarding—" Edmund paused, his gaze meeting hers with unexpected directness. "Regarding you, Miss Vale." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks, though she maintained her composure. "I see. Do you?" Edmund stepped closer, close enough that she could detect the faint scent of cedar and leather that always accompanied him. "Because I find myself increasingly uncertain of what I see or feel or believe. Catherine's death left me in darkness so complete I believed nothing would ever penetrate it. Grief creates its own reality, Eleanor offered quietly, one in which tomorrow seems impossible. Yet you have shown me that it is not only possible, but perhaps worthy of anticipation. The words hung between them, weighted with implications neither dared fully acknowledge. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted Henry's blanket, buying precious seconds to master her response. Your son has brought meaning back to your days, Your Grace. I have merely facilitated that reunion. You diminish your role, Edmund countered gently. It was you who taught me to see him not as emblem of loss, but as Catherine's final gift. A sound from the doorway interrupted them, the distinct click of boots on hardwood. They turned to find Lord Crowe observing their tableau, his expression a study in calculated concern. "Cousin?" he drawled. "The hour grows late for nursery visits. The staff might draw unfortunate conclusions." Edmund straightened, his aristocratic bearing reasserting itself. "I was bidding my son good night, Nathaniel. A father's privilege requires no explanation." "Of course," Crowe agreed smoothly, his gaze sliding to Eleanor. "Though Miss Vale's duties surely concluded with the child's retirement, her presence here, alone with you at this hour, invites speculation." Eleanor felt the accusation like a physical blow, though her expression remained impassive. "If you'll excuse me, Your Grace, Lord Crowe, I should retire. Morning comes early in the nursery." Before either man could respond, she slipped past them into her adjoining chamber, closing the door with soft finality. Through the heavy oak she could hear their voices, Edmund's low and controlled, Crowe's persuasive and insistent, discussing matters that would undoubtedly determine her fate. For the first time since her arrival at Greystone Hall, Eleanor permitted herself tears, silent and disciplined, as she packed her meagre belongings. Experience had taught her that scandal, even unearned, meant immediate dismissal. By morning she must be prepared to leave the child who had claimed her heart, and the man who had, despite all reason and propriety, begun to heal it. Outside, the wind rose to a howl, matching the storm that gathered within the ancient walls of Greystone Hall, a tempest of loyalty and betrayal, of awakening love and calculated ambition, all centered around a woman who had come seeking mere employment and found something far more perilous. Morning arrived with leaden skies and a household in quiet turmoil. Word had spread through servants' whispers of a confrontation between the Duke and his cousin, though the substance of their disagreement remained subject to speculation. Eleanor moved through her duties with mechanical precision, her face composed despite the sleepless night that had preceded dawn. Henry sensed her distress, fussing more than usual as she dressed him for the day. "Hush, little one," she murmured, pressing a kiss to his forehead that held the weight of farewell. "All shall be well, though perhaps not as we might wish." A soft knock at the nursery door revealed Mrs. Winters, her expression unusually troubled. "Miss Vale, His Grace requests your presence in the library immediately." Eleanor nodded, having expected this summons. "Of course. Will you watch over Master Henry?" The housekeeper took the child with unexpected gentleness. "I shall." "And Miss Vale," she hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain, "judge not too harshly what you have not yet heard." Puzzled by this cryptic statement, Eleanor made her way through the hushed corridors of Greystone Hall, each step feeling like movement toward inevitable exile. The library door stood partially open, voices emerging from within, not two as she had expected, but three. "I assure you, Sir Alaric, my concern is purely for Edmund's reputation and the dignity of the Harrow name." Lord Crowe's voice carried a defensive edge Eleanor had not previously detected. "Curious, then, that your concern manifests as slander against a woman whose only apparent transgression is competent service." The unknown voice, presumably Sir Alaric, spoke with cultured authority. "Gentlemen, this discussion serves no purpose until Miss Vale herself is present." Edmund's tone held a finality that silenced the others. Eleanor straightened her shoulders, knocked once, and entered. The library presented a tableau of masculine power. Edmund behind his desk, Lord Crowe by the fireplace, and a third gentleman, distinguished perhaps 50, with the bearing of military service, seated comfortably as if belonging to this inner sanctum. "Miss Vale," Edmund acknowledged, his expression carefully neutral. "Allow me to present Sir Alaric Wynne, my late father's closest friend and my godfather." Sir Alaric rose, bowing with old-world courtesy. "Miss Vale, a pleasure. I've heard much of your exceptional care for young Henry." "Thank you, sir." Eleanor curtsied, confusion mounting at this unexpected introduction. "Please be seated," Edmund instructed, indicating a chair positioned noticeably apart from Lord Crowe. "We have matters of grave importance to discuss." Eleanor obeyed, her hands folded in her lap to conceal their slight trembling. "I am at your disposal, Your Grace." "Last night," Edmund began without preamble, "Lord Crowe raised certain concerns regarding your presence at Greystone Hall. He suggested impropriety in our interactions and questioned your intentions toward my household." Eleanor's cheeks paled, but her gaze remained steady. "I understand, Your Grace. If you wish for my immediate departure, I have prepared—" "I do not," Edmund interrupted, his voice sharper than intended. More softly, he continued, "That is, your departure is precisely what I wish to prevent." Lord Crowe stepped forward, his handsome features arranged in an expression of pained concern. "Cousin, consider your position. The rumors already circulate below stairs. A duke, recently widowed, spending unchaperoned evenings with his son's nursemaid." "A duke," Sir Alaric interjected dryly, "attending to his son in the presence of his caregiver. How scandalous indeed." "The appearance," Crowe began. "The appearance," Edmund cut in, "concerns me far less than the substance. Miss Vale has transformed this household from a mausoleum to a home. Henry thrives under her care. He paused, seeming to gather courage. "I find myself looking toward future days, rather than dwelling in past sorrows." Eleanor's heart quickened at his words, though she kept her expression composed. "Your Grace, while I am honored by your confidence, Lord Crowe's concerns are not without merit. My position here is precarious." "Which brings us to the purpose of this meeting," Edmund said, withdrawing a letter from his desk drawer. "Sir Alaric, would you be so kind?" The older gentleman took the proffered document, clearing his throat before reading, "To whom it may concern, I, Lady Margaret Westmoreland, being of sound mind, hereby attest to the exceptional character and circumstance of my late companion, Miss Eleanor Vale. Though she enters my service as a paid companion, her birth and education befit one of gentle station. Her father, Reverend Thomas Vale, served as chaplain to my late husband before financial ruin befell him through no fault save generosity of spirit. Miss Vale's acceptance of employment represents not a natural station, but a noble sacrifice undertaken to support her siblings following her parents' untimely passing. Should Providence smile upon her, I pray that her true quality may someday be recognized by those with discernment to see beyond circumstance to character. With my seal and witness, Lady Margaret Westmoreland, Countess of Westmoreland." Silence fell as Sir Alaric refolded the letter. Lord Crowe's expression had soured visibly, while Eleanor sat perfectly still, emotions warring beneath her composed exterior. "How did you obtain this?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wrote to Lady Westmoreland's solicitor," Edmund explained. "The Countess, it seems, anticipated that your circumstances might one day require verification." "A touching character reference," Crowe interjected, recovering his composure. "Yet it hardly addresses the current situation. The fact remains that Miss Vale's position in this household has evolved beyond appropriate boundaries." "On that point, Nathaniel, we find rare agreement," Edmund replied, rising from behind his desk. "Which is why I have reached a decision that will resolve this matter conclusively." Eleanor's hands tightened in her lap, preparing herself for whatever judgment awaited. Edmund moved to stand before her, his expression grave, yet somehow lightened, as if a decision long contemplated had finally crystallized into certainty. "Miss Vale, Eleanor, from the moment you appeared at my door that midnight, something in this house began to change. The silence became less oppressive, the darkness less absolute. Henry found joy, and I—" He paused, seeming to search for words adequate to the moment. "I remembered what it meant to anticipate tomorrow rather than dread it." From the corner of her eye, Eleanor saw Lord Crowe's face darken with comprehension and fury. Sir Alaric, by contrast, watched with the quiet satisfaction of one witnessing long-awaited spring after brutal winter. "Your Grace," Eleanor began, uncertain of where this declaration led. "I have only performed my duties as no one else could have done," Edmund completed gently, "with grace, intelligence, and a compassion that has healed more than one broken heart within these walls." To Eleanor's astonishment, Edmund lowered himself to one knee before her chair, taking her trembling hand in his. The gesture was so unprecedented, so contrary to every social dictate, that she could formulate no response. "Lord Crowe believes your presence here untenable under current arrangements," Edmund continued, his voice gaining strength and certainty with each word. "On this we agree. Therefore I ask you, no, I entreat you, to consider a change in your position at Greystone Hall." From his waistcoat, he withdrew a small velvet box that had belonged to generations of Harrow duchesses. "Not as nursemaid to my son, but as mother. not as employee in my household, but as mistress of it. Not as Miss Vale, but as Duchess of Ashbourne. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by Lord Crowe's sharp intake of breath and the distant ticking of the ancient clock that had witnessed centuries of Harrow history. Eleanor's free hand flew to her throat, her composure finally breaking. Your Grace, Edmund, this cannot be. The disparity in our stations means nothing, he interrupted firmly. You were born a gentleman's daughter, but even had you been born in the lowest circumstances, I would still be kneeling here today. Catherine would not wish me or Henry to deny love when Providence has granted it a second time. Lord Crowe stepped forward, his handsome features contorted with barely contained rage. This is madness, Edmund. The Tun will never accept such a match. You risk everything, your reputation, your standing, your legacy. No, Nathaniel, Edmund replied, without looking away from Eleanor's face. For the first time since Catherine's death, I risk living rather than merely existing. The Tun's opinion pales before that prospect. Sir Alaric rose, moving to stand beside the kneeling Duke. If I may, as one who has known Edmund since infancy and loved him as a son, I have not seen such light in his eyes since before tragedy struck this house. Miss Vale, whatever your answer, know that it comes with at least one voice of unqualified support. Eleanor looked from Sir Alaric's kind face to Edmund's earnest one, then to the door where Mrs. Winters now stood with Henry in her arms. The housekeeper's usually stern countenance had softened, her nod almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. In that moment of perfect clarity, Eleanor recognized the truth that had been building since that rain-soaked midnight, that some journeys begin with desperation, but end with providence. That sometimes when one door closes with cruel finality, another opens to reveal previously unimagined possibilities. Yes, she whispered. Then, with growing certainty, yes, Edmund. Not for position or security, but because in this house of shadows, I too have found light renewed. As Edmund slipped his mother's ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if designed for this moment, Lord Crowe stormed from the library, his ambitions shattered against the unexpected resilience of love reborn. Outside, the leaden skies began to clear, autumn sunlight streaming through stained glass to cast jeweled patterns across the ancient carpet. Henry cooed from Mrs. Winters' arms, reaching toward the couple as if understanding that the provisional family that had been forming around him had now been sealed with sacred promise. Sir Alaric cleared his throat, eyes suspiciously bright. I believe congratulations are in order, and perhaps champagne. Greystone Hall has mourned long enough. Today marks the return of joy to these hallowed halls. As servants were summoned and the news spread through the household like warming fire, Edmund and Eleanor stood in the pool of coloured light, the Duchess's ring catching and reflecting rainbows across their joined hands. From midnight to morning, Edmund murmured, his forehead touching hers in a gesture of intimate tenderness. From darkness to dawn. Eleanor's smile held all the quiet radiance of a soul that had weathered storms and emerged stronger for the tempest, from seeking mere employment to finding home. Henry's laughter, bright and bell-like, seemed to seal their covenant with innocent blessing. Together they formed a new beginning, not erasing the past, but building upon its foundation a future where grief and joy could coexist, where midnight could lead to dawn, and where a door opened in kindness could become the threshold to unexpected love. Thus did Greystone Hall, which had known the bitter depths of mourning, learn once more the taste of joy. The ancient stones which had absorbed so many tears now witnessed the gentle rebirth of hope within their embrace. For in this world of uncertain fortunes and capricious fate, what greater providence exists than this, that two souls, each wounded by life's cruelties, might find in one another not merely companionship, but completion, that a child born of one love might be raised in the warmth of another, equally sacred. Eleanor and Edmund were wed when spring returned to Greystone Hall, the chapel filled with witnesses to their unlikely union. Society whispered, of course, the Tun always does, but faced with the evident happiness of the Duke and his bride, even the most stubborn gossips eventually found other matters to occupy their speculation. Lord Crowe returned to London, his ambitions redirected toward more receptive quarters. Yet the taste of defeat remained bitter upon his tongue, a reminder that even the most carefully plotted courses may be undone by the simple, unexpected power of genuine emotion. Sir Alaric, pleased beyond measure at his godson's renewal, became a frequent visitor and devoted honorary grandfather to young Henry. His military stories and adventurous spirit ensured the child would grow with both roots and wings, secure in love, yet bold in aspiration. Mrs. Winters unbent enough to smile on occasion, though she maintained that proper household management required a certain severity. Still, the staff noted that her reprimands had lost their sting, replaced by a gruff affection that extended even to the newest additions to the nursery when in time Henry welcomed siblings. As for Eleanor and Edmund, they discovered that love built upon mutual respect and shared experience possesses a foundation more enduring than passion alone could provide. Their days unfolded with purpose and contentment, their evenings with quiet companionship, their midnight hours with the peaceful knowledge that neither would face darkness alone again. And sometimes, on autumn nights when rain tapped against leaded glass and wind whispered through ancient yew trees, they would stand together at the great oak door of Greystone Hall, remembering that fateful midnight when desperation met compassion and Providence disguised itself as mere coincidence. What might have happened, Eleanor would sometimes muse, had I arrived in daylight properly announced with my letter of recommendation still legible? Then, Edmund would reply, drawing her close, we would still have found our way to this moment, for some souls are destined to meet regardless of time or circumstance. The lamp in the entrance hall burned steadily against encroaching shadows, its flame a testament to the light that can be kindled even in the darkest hour, when hope seems most distant, when doors appear most firmly closed, when the heart believes itself forever silenced by grief. For this is the truth that Eleanor and Edmund discovered, that midnight can indeed be the beginning of dawn, that seeking employment can lead to finding purpose, and that opening a door to compassion may welcome in love that transforms mourning into dancing, ashes into beauty, and despair into the most unexpected joy. Some called it chance, others providence. But those who witnessed the transformation of Greystone Hall from mausoleum to home recognized it by its proper name, love in its most redemptive form, healing broken hearts, restoring shattered faith, and proving once again that even the longest night eventually yields to morning's gentle light. Moral: when grief and necessity meet compassion, the darkest midnight can become the threshold of dawn. No door opened in kindness is ever truly a mistake, for Providence works through simple gestures to create extraordinary beginnings. If this story of midnight redemption touched your heart, remember that even the smallest act of compassion can transform a life. Share your thoughts below and perhaps together we might bring a little more light into someone else's darkness.